Hi everyone. Today I wanted to talk to you about the concept of polarities because this is something that I get asked about quite often. Now, usually polarity describes opposite energies, and in my opinion, polarity can really be seen as the presence or manifestation of two contrasting principles or tendencies. Now, polarity is viewed as opposites. Examples of polarities can include things like night and day, North Pole, South Pole, hot and cold, even magnetic electric, yin and yang, good and evil, activity and rest, thinkers and feelers, the god and goddess, male and female, even change and stability are polarities, as are responsibility and freedom. Now, polarities in which people or partners exist is when they have differing perspectives or personality traits. So they're not the same. Although in our human species, and probably very much more specifically in Western societies, polarity as seen in male and female have become very, or are understood in binary terms of male and female. So they're binary oppositions, and not only binary oppositions in terms of biology, but also binary oppositions in terms of economic activities. In many cultures throughout the world, typically men and women had, and in some cases still have, differing roles and responsibilities, and even personal attributes or traits or behaviors that they need to adhere to in that specific societal construct or cultural construct. So typically the role of a woman was to emphasize the nurturing aspect of womanhood, because they were seen as female who could reproduce. Now, women's roles were often relegated to caretakers, emotional support systems. They were often seen as kind and passive, and usually their economic activity was centered around the home. The male of our species, of course, was stereotypically, and sometimes still is, stereotypically associated with dominance and strength. They were seen as protectors. So there are also, in addition to what I've just said, there are countless examples across the world throughout many different cultures to indicate that these sociological and societal and cultural norms are more fluid depending on the specific culture the male and the female of the species would find themselves in. We know, for example, that in some cultures the male of the species would take on the role of a female and vice versa. So, or what was stereotypically what we would view as a male and female gender role. So in many cultures and societies, these gender roles are, and may sometimes still be, enforced. But in other cultures, they are more fluid. However, in our Western culture, the role of men and women, and again, in some cases, unfortunately, I would say, still is viewed and often enforced through this very binary construct of male and female, and what those specific people are supposed to do, that's very much rooted in a patriarchal system. Now, we know, of course, that these stereotypical roles that are associated with the male and female are really out of place in our modern society. We also know that stereotypical gender expression is very much related to the societal construct of any given society. How men and women dress or dressed, how they interact, how they behave, their supposed emotional constitution or whatever are typically guided by the culture and society that they were born into or find themselves in. So just like any other polarities, things like, say, joy and sorrow, hot and cold, light and dark, these all exist in relation to each other. So having varying sort of tendencies or levels, they may not literally be polar opposites. They exist on a spectrum sort of in relation to each other. So when we think about things like color, or opposite ends of the spectrum of black and white, in between we know that there are many, many different other shades of gray, and that the same is also true for any other spectrum of polar opposites. In the concept of masculine and feminine, or the attributes of so-called stereotypical masculine and feminine, they exist on a spectrum as well. But to me, the value of a polarity is that a polarity is interconnected and part of the same underlying whole that exists on the spectrum. There usually isn't a very hard and fast division when we think about things that exist on a spectrum. It allows for balance between two extremes. So when we think about humans and polarity, they can also be thought of in people that are in relation to each other, that exist in a spectrum. So some might be more inclined to have or to display traits and behaviors that are more to one end of the spectrum or more to the other side of the spectrum. But when we are thinking about these things related to a tradition, what I'm really trying to get at is that for us in our traditions, the stereotypical gender and opposite sex initiation is not important in our traditions. It may once have been important in a historical context, and that historical context was based very much on cultural and societal constructs at the time. But those aren't actually relevant any longer. It has not been for a very long time. Now, as far back as the early 1970s, our elders had laid out for us, and this can actually be seen in the published book, the Sacred Pentagraph book of the Sacred Pentagraph tradition, where in the part called the Covenant, Book 1, in this publication, it's outlined that, and it actually states that the craft shall not exclude any of the God's children for reasons of race, national origin, sexual orientation, or previous religious background or affiliations. Now, even in some of our private communications, one of our tradition elders, Tara Starr, actually said that the elders of that time didn't want to shut out talented people due to old prejudices. And the concept of gender or masculine and feminine could also even be thought about in terms of a giver or a receiver, but that gender was actually irrelevant, even far back as the early 1970s. So our initiation rituals in our tradition are not gendered mysteries, as they may be in some other Wiccan traditions. Any person, regardless of their biology, can take on the role of a high priest or the role of a high priestess in our traditions. Now, even though these are or were very gendered terms according to biology at one time, they are no longer gendered for us. So a high priestess is seen more as somebody who holds a specific role, as a high priest has a specific role in a specific job with specific functions. Now, these gendered terms made at one time in history have been associated specifically with the stereotypified roles of male and female. But for us, they are not related to biology, but rather they are seen as roles, and that the people, the high priesthood embodying these specific roles, is more to do with the role and it's a type of division of labor where the attributes of each of those people are complementary but different. Whereas I said earlier, they are different, but they work together harmoniously to create a whole. So the people that fulfill these roles in the high priesthood often have very different skill sets and personality traits, but together they enhance and they create this balance in a coven. And the roles are related to the specific responsibilities and actions that are needed within a coven. They are not dictated by biological sex. Now, when we think about a high priest and a high priestess, the embodiment of the god and goddess. So the high priestess is supposed to embody that creative force of the goddess, and the high priest is supposed to embody that force of the god in terms of their very specific attributes. So for us, to briefly sum up, a high priest and a high priestess can be either male or female, or male and female. It isn't the important factor. What is important is to understand that for us it is more about the polarity on a specific spectrum, where the people that are working together to lead a coven will often have and embody these opposite attributes. I hope this was helpful to you. Next time I will be addressing some of the questions that seekers often have when they approach the coven, and I'll also be talking a little bit about some of the questions that new students often have. Blessed be.